So welcome everybody. I have Tim Miles here from Fiberhawk, which is Swayze and Yeoman Telecom companies combined. I also have Rob Jodrie, who is Syncworks Technical Director, and I'm Dave Barbush, I'm the Marketing Director.
My father was the president of Sunman Telephone Company, and I'm fourth generation telephone. And my first year working, I spent the entire time painting the central offices and blacktopping the driveways. That was my first summer working. I did accounts payables, and then I also did the NECA work and the cabs billing for our company. And of course, you guys know that about 95% of all of our revenue back in those days was carrier access. And so I learned a lot about that. Then I was still in the National Guard during that entire period. So, I supplemented my income during that period being in the Army. But in 1990, TA-96 hit, and we started to do CLEC work. And we were going to CLEC our neighboring areas of Batesville, Indiana. And I took that position on as the CLEC manager in 1996. DSL wasn't even a real thing yet to that point. We were one of the very first companies in the state of Indiana to even put DSL in, and that was in 2000. And so CLEC Batesville, we took over about 95% of all the access lines in Batesville. And so in 2007, my wife and I bought Swayze Telephone Company, and then we bought the Yeoman Telephone Company in 2015. We serve about 3,000 fiber subscribers and more or less about 6,000 units total in all of our rural areas that we provide service.
One thing I notice about is as folks get hired into this industry today, an observation of mine is just that there's no sort of boot camp, you know what I'm saying, as far as coming up through the ranks. And I noticed you were doing asphalt work and painting buildings, and I started out back in the mainframe. I mean, just working, stringing tip and ring wire, opening coils for the outside folks and all. And it was mundane and tedious and all, but it just was a really good, that's what I think is missing with a lot of folks, because we bring people in this industry, in some cases, put them behind a desk and say, here you go. And they're turning up OC 192s or just all this gear, and they don't have any sort of a context around it, which is interesting. I can tell someone with your background, you've sort of run through the ranks a bit.
I started off doing the manual labor, and then I went to construction, and I did a year of construction, and then I did out running trouble tickets. And even in the smaller companies, we didn't have a lot of the high dollar stuff, Centrex and things of that nature. But I learned a lot, and we did troubleshooting the good old fashioned way. It was listening to the buzzing, and I learned a lot. And I worked for 2 years doing nothing but working trouble outside plant after the construction. And then when I got brought into the inside, I worked answering phones and did all the other CSR work. I did that for about a year prior to getting into the accounts payable. It was the accounts payable while I was going to college and learning the bookkeeping side of the house that really solidified my transition into the front office.
Similar experience with me with 30 some odd years in Verizon, huge corporation, and came to a relatively small company, Syncworks. And then it was nice because my manager, similar situation, or I guess outlook to you, is I have a lot of latitude. I mean, he trusts that what needs to be done. There's not a lot of micromanaging, and I like sort of just having a lot of hats on. Day to day, it's not the same stuff. In a big corporation, you can get into silos and you're pushing the same boxes around day in, day out. And that's not the case in a smaller organization. So
the intercompany cooperation, it really, when TA-96 hit, back in the old days, you could call GTE or AT&T, and they would even send technicians out to help you if you were having a problem. Nowadays, you're on your own. There's enough business to go around for everybody, but the overall cooperation is really what I miss in our industry.
There used to be more, you use the word collaboration. I think that applies to both internally and also, as you say, buying gear, equipment, and getting support. I mean, you mentioned a 5ESS switch. We turned up a lot of those over the days, and as you say, AT&T would oftentimes be on site with us. They would work with us COEI people. There was a handoff, big time collaboration. And I'm with you now. You buy a box and it shows up. Syncworks, our model is very much not that way. We offer turnkey services, and that's one thing that I love about what we do is, we show up on site, we bring the equipment, we work with the local folks, we install it, make it all work, do training and all that kind of thing. And I think that's, I'm proud that we do that. That's one thing I think the telecom and cable company industries have lost is you buy this stuff and now you got it and you got to make it work and make it plug and play. And that is a loss.
It's equipment, it's software.
Yep.
Every aspect of our business is, you spend a lot of money on this equipment, and if it doesn't work right, or your employees don't want to make it work, now you're just stuck
Right.
with an anchor. It's pretty. Yeah, it could be very frustrating as an owner, and you spend $100,000 on some software or a piece of equipment that you expect to revolutionize everything, and if your employees don't want to use it or
Sure.
or have a hard time with it, you're just stuck having it. The vendor's pretty much out of the picture at that point. Oh, and also the support is very expensive. I mean, everything's expensive, but so that's just. That's just goes without saying. That's what I really miss about the good old days when you could buy something and everybody would know how it would operate.
Sure. Yeah, and you mentioned the training component. I mean, that's a big thing too. I think a lot of people don't use gear either at all or to its full, potential because they don't understand it. And that's one thing we will do is when we fire up these new bits clocks and get the stuff going, we'll bring the local folks on board, and here's how you log on, and here's some alarms you might see, and then again, we always leave our business cards, and here's how to reach us, and the lack of support that's out there is it's a big thing.
Well, we're all of our old telephone companies, and we're built on the basis of old farmers getting together to build the networks.
Right.
My great grandfather Robert Miller bought Sunman Telephone Company, was a conglomeration of 13 smaller telephone companies, and of course there was no money in it. He worked at the grain mill in order to subsidize the entire project. And so it wasn't until the electrification in 1934, and then they named AT&T as a monopoly, and then AT&T went to all these companies that had the networks, and they came to my great grandfather and said, "We want you to this is your area." And then they went to other areas and said, "This is your area," and that way, and you will be a monopoly. We will only build a long distance line into you. No one else can have a long distance line, and that's how they maintain the monopolies. And we will subsidize you so that people can afford telephone service. But then when they use their long distance service, we will make sure that not only do you have long distance, but we will make sure that you are stable. Because if they didn't, they were going to have to go in and build the areas.
Sure.
And so yeah, that's where the cooperation originally came from.
Right.
That is my grandfather. Sorry, I get a little choked up.
Really? That's okay.
It's so my grandfather's wearing the red coat. And Bobby Keith was his very first employee. I believe he's getting a an award there. Bobby Keith is getting an award for like 25 years of service. Bobby Keith didn't know how to read and write.
Working. This looks like a beautiful summer day in Indiana.
Yeah, I think my wife took that one after an ice storm in Swayze a couple of years ago.
Gotcha. So how much are you sweating when you see those frozen branches intermingled with those power lines, or those lines up there?
Oh, believe me, we've repaired many a line. We try to do as much buried as we can. When we bought Yeoman Telephone Company in 2015, we got a lot of history along with it. That's why there's almost more history about the Yeoman Telephone Company than there is on the Swayze side, because they did a really good job. This, we had a bunch of stuff in the drawers, and this was one of the pictures that they had. And so I obviously wasn't around during that time period, but they were very nostalgic. Most of the telephone companies in the state of Indiana started by, late 1800s, of course. You could buy a landline switch out of the Sears and Roebuck catalog, and then all the farmers connected their lines together to create a telephone company. And most telephone companies in Indiana were a conglomeration of multiple farmer switches where they put everything together. This phone booth came from a hotel in New York. My grandfather bought it from, I don't know which hotel in New York, but AT&T agreed to build a line to Napoleon. And in order to make or receive a long distance telephone company or a long distance telephone call in Napoleon, you had to go to my grandparents' house and you would sit in that phone booth in their house to make and receive long distance phone calls in the 1950s. When I bought Swayze Telephone Company in 2007, these were the original employees. When we bought the Yeoman Telephone Company in 2015, my wife and I, my wife is the young lady standing in front of me. This was pretty much at the beginning of when fiber was coming to the area. Me buying the Yeoman Telephone Company is a kind of an interesting story, because I had successfully bought the Swayze Telephone Company in 2007, and Yeoman was fairly small. There's a lake, it's called Lake Freeman, around it, and Comcast had overbuilt them all the way around the lake. So Yeoman had really experienced a fairly large loss of access lines, and they had, just regular little DSL and not really that great a DSL to start off with. And so they were shopping Yeoman Telephone Company around, and their switch was very old. They needed a new switch. And so I was like the fourth or fifth person that they went to, and they begged me to buy the telephone company. It's our very first computer. I think that's circa 1982 when we, that's in Sunman. That's my Uncle Warren there. He was a computer expert, I guess, at the time, and my dad brought him in to help with setting the computer up. We won the IBTA Company of the Year that year. Audra Hicks, she was one of my original employees. She's holding the plaque, and she's still there. And Dave Blacker, who just retired, he came with Yeoman Telephone Company. And so we won the IBTA Company of the Year. I believe that was 2017 or 2018. I can't really remember. And then I'm the one with the beard. And then my wife is right behind me. And then our daughter is right behind her. But we were very proud of winning that award.
It was fascinating to listen to all that history. It really was. I've never heard about that farmers network. The fact that these folks are buying switches at Sears and Roebuck. I've never heard that. That was fascinating to me. That's how that network got built.
For companies like us, it's all going to be about broadband. It's all going to be about how much bandwidth that you can get to a subscriber. We're building a project right now in Frankfort, Indiana, in Clinton County area, and we're setting it up to be able to do 10 gig service per resident. And so I think within the next 10 years, people will be buying multi-gig services like they're buying 1 gig services nowadays. It may not be 10 gig, but you're going to see the 8K TVs coming out. And farmers need, what people don't understand, farmers create data because of their fields and all, and so, people think, oh, farmers don't need broadband service because, they don't need to watch Netflix out in the middle of nowhere. There's a big fight with the USF because people don't think that people in the rural area, the city people don't think rural people need to be subsidized in order to be able to provide broadband service. But it is essential that these farmers get as much bandwidth as they possibly can, upload and download. So my prediction is that within 20 years, that 10 gig is going to be a standard broadband provision within our industry. Just look where we, 5 or 10 years ago, like I said, 25 meg was almost too much for people. But I think as we grow and we progress, my youngest granddaughter's 18, 19 months old right now. She doesn't know a world without Miss Rachel that she can watch anytime that she wants. Those are the generation that we're going to have to serve.